think we have a nice critical mass here. So should we go ahead and get started?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on this Friday to join in on Brandon's dissertation defense. Congratulations, Brandon, for getting it this far. I also wanted to start by thanking the committee members, Dr. Ed Hanna, Dr. Deb Morrison, Dr. Amanda Cody, and myself. And so, again, we'll start off with Brandon presenting a few slides on his work. Then we'll open it up to questions from the committee, and then time permitting, we'll open up to questions from the gallery. So with that, Brandon, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chris. Share that. Okay, let's wait for this to load. There we go. All right, so my dissertation, the title of which is Twitch Streamers and the Platformization of Cultural Production, Understanding Complementary Labor in the Creative Industries. So I'm going to start with a brief overview because I'm aware that many of you probably don't know what Twitch is or spent very little time actually watching it. And so what you are looking at right now is a static image of what a person would look at when they tune into a Twitch broadcast. So in this main window right here, this is the activity that the streamer is broadcasting. To the left, you have the streamer themselves, and so they have a webcam basically that corresponds with the action on the screen. So this streamer is talking and narrating their gameplay and their activity. To the right over here, you have the chat room, and so all of these people are followers because you can see right here, subscribers only. So all of these people are talking. They are fans of this streamer on the left side, and so you have the streamer's gameplay going on, and then you have the chat room that is in response to all of that. So as you can see, there's a lot of different ways to communicate and interact in real time. And that is part of the reason why Twitch is so unique compared to other types of social media platforms. And so I'm sure that all of you have seen some of these headlines with crazy stories, about, streamers like Ninja who are getting to cast NFL games. Twitch streamers are repeatedly becoming millionaires. Twitch streamers are changing the video game industry. And Twitch streamers are providing their input on games and like what would be good and what would be bad. And so this type of input is actually has real commercial impacts on a game's livelihood and success as a product overall. And so to take it back a little bit at this point, this is Twitch and its influencers are one of many platforms, and they're many different types of social media influencers. So as digital platforms are becoming increasingly popular and prominent in the creative media industries, Twitch is becoming one of the most popular in the live streaming specific spaces, and it has rearranged video game and other cultural industries around itself. So in order to conduct my analysis and my interest in these platforms, I'm mostly interested in this dissertation in how do influencers navigate the demands of the platform, the company itself, sponsors and advertisers, as well as communities. And so specifically, what does that look like in terms of labor? Second research question overall is how do successful influencers complement the platform logics of Twitch and the company? So what are the limits of this complementing behavior? How are these limits differently experienced by different creators? And how do they respond to these challenges? So I will return to these research questions in just a moment, but the key interest here in my dissertation is how does it influence, what labor goes into becoming a successful influencer, and what are the limits of that labor, and does everyone have an equal opportunity to do that labor? So for theoretical frameworks, I am drawing from platformization theory. This is something that is brand new that is being developed as we speak from many people around the world. But essentially, this is a group of people from multiple disciplines, from software studies, from business studies, from political economy, from critical media studies, and all of these people with different methods and ways of doing research are interested in figuring out how are platform companies like Facebook or Google reshaping our world? Like what exactly is happening here? And so this is an emerging framework, and so obviously every platform is a bit different. But the key concepts that this theory draws from is that it considers platforms as a corporate-owned social network, and that social network is used as infrastructure to facilitate interactions between users. And every one of these interactions is recorded and turned into surveillance data that is then used to generate ad revenue. So these are digital scaffoldings, the infrastructure. They are constantly customized, they are continuously growing, and new features are being added to them. And so that is what drives this process called platformization. And so specifically what I am looking at when I say what is platform theory is I am looking at how platforms like Twitch have cultivated more power over economies and infrastructures through the production, distribution, and circulation of cultural content. And so I am pairing this with research on the cultural industries. And so while platformization theory draws on and it's developed for the newest tech company startups, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft, cultural industries is a bit older. It draws its historical roots from the Frankfurt School post-World War II. And so basically this is a longer tradition of critically examining multimedia industry companies and how they have the power to influence how society thinks about things, how things are presented. So it's starting with Adorno and Horkheimer with their view of the culture industry when they were talking about the U.S. film industry and how how a highly concentrated group of owners allows them greater control over the types of films that are being produced. Let me go back. Bernard Miege has the cultural industries to kind of complicate things a little bit further, saying that not every type of media industry is the same and that they function differently depending on the level of industrialization involved, as well as some workers are allowed more creative autonomy than others. So basically, this idea is that not every industry is the same. And finally, David Hesmanhall combines these together to kind of give a more holistic view of legacy media industries to see how specifically they use infrastructure and control to basically establish the industrial working conditions that regulate these industries. So all that is to say, I am looking at how the company ownership of Twitch functions as a cultural industry and how that determines new working conditions for Twitch streamers and influencers. And so, as we know, platforms evolve very quickly. If you were to look at Facebook now and compare that to what Facebook was when it launched in 2004, they're very different services. And so they are almost living and evolving things, right? And so rather than drawing on something like a longer form ethnographic participant observation method, I wanted something that was a little bit more suited to how quickly these changes can evolve. And so I'm drawing from case studies and critical discourse analysis. So critical discourse analysis is useful for understanding these dialectical relationships and how people make sense of their world around them through media. And so through this type of research, it draws attention to the power relations, how media is produced, as well as labor conditions. Similarly, I'm using comparative case studies in this dissertation because, as I said, things can evolve so quickly at Twitch that I think that the case study method is well suited to giving specific dates. So all of my case studies are a reflection of a specific point in time in Twitch rather than a generalizable ultimate truth that will forever hold up. This research is very contingent on the time that it is done, and so it's a reflection of this very specific time period. So for my first case study, this is basically designed to capture frictionless complementary labor. And so when I say frictionless complementary labor, I mean what happens when this whole system functions the way that it is designed to. And so I'm going to show you a quick trailer. Is that audio playing?
It's not.
Okay. You can kind of get the idea. That's okay. So all right, well, that is not working the way that it's supposed to, but we can overcome this. Just a second. Oh, God. Nope. Okay, so restarting that. Basically, the idea is that this is a game that is designed to be. It uses a childish aesthetic, so it's designed to be inviting, and something very different from the first-person shooters that have like hyper-realistic violence and blood and gore in them. And so this game came out at the kind of towards the end of 2020 pandemic. So people were locked inside. They were all excited about new games. And so when this game came out, people started playing it very quickly. Tim the Tatman is a straight white man who identifies as a nerd. He identifies as a jock. He likes to talk about the NFL, and he likes to, talk about going to drink beers with his bros. And so basically his identity matches what the gaming industry has historically considered their core demographic, basically. And so in terms of what kind of barriers to becoming a professional influencer does this person face? He faces zero additional barriers, right? Like, yes, he still has to go through, he's been a streamer for over 10 years. And so, he's taken a lot of time to develop his audience and his following. I don't want to suggest that that happened on accident or like by default. But in terms of like additional barriers, and if advertisers are willing to work with you, he doesn't face any resistance or challenges in that aspect. And so when this game first came out, Tim has a reputation of being not the best gamer. And so that's kind of strange in Twitch right now, where people tend to watch streamers because they're the best at the game possible. So this man's personality is more of the reason why people are watching him than his skill as a gamer. And so that's important because when this game, Fall Guys, first releases, they recognize that there is a joke made about him that Tim is bad at video games and that he would never be able to play the game, or never get a win at the game. And they are able to leverage that into a free marketing campaign for themselves. And so Tim is generally paid to sponsor video games, right? That's his whole job model. That's his career model. That's what he's supposed to do. So not only is he getting, hold on, let me go back to these real quick, these tweets. So he is made the victim of a joke that he's never going to win. And so as you can see from the bottom, this is the Fall Guys Twitter account. So they'll tweet things like, Tim, you might want to make your profile private after this stream. I've been lining up so many roasts today in preparation for your losing streak. Can you remember when you called it a kid's game? So this is kind of like, so imagine you're going to work and, your middle manager is basically commenting on how poor you are at your job and that you're never going to be able to do it. And so rather than trying to motivate you to work harder, they're doing that through something that is essentially bullying. And so as you can see here, this creates such a public spectacle that other brands on Twitter are able to comment on this, right? And so you've got endemic gaming brands, you've got like esports organizations, his sponsors like G Fuel, and so some of these brands that are normally part of this gaming world that comment on it. But you also have non-endemic brands like Spotify coming in. Like, imagine that this is so funny to so many people that even Spotify's main Twitter account is like mocking you after like a week of trying and failing to win this game. So this attention was described and understood as a massive media success, right? The game itself sold 7 million copies within the first month of launch, so that is a tremendous commercial success and that any game developer would be thrilled about. This box on top is a screenshot of Tim's own views, and so he took a screenshot. So when he finally won, he had 182,000 people on average watching him in the stream. In that last broadcast, he had almost 1.3 million unique viewers. And so he had almost 350,000 concurrent viewers at one point. And so all that is an impressive amount of audience in one time. And so on Twitch, where the money is made by showing viewers ads, that 182,000 average viewers, right? That's what you're calculating the ad revenue off of, and the max viewers. So this is a tremendously effective and profitable event, and so it demonstrates how that Twitch is that Twitch is sanctioning Tim to do this type of complimentary behavior, because Twitch was actively involved in these tweets. They were basically saying that this is okay to people, that this type of behavior between brands, fans, and the creator is okay. And they actively egged it on. And so what does this mean, right? Because if this is the person who fits the core gaming demographic, and if this is the person who is supposed to have like the most frictionless entry into the marketplace, if this person wasn't getting paid millions of dollars for this, it would be just targeted harassment. And so because he's able to turn this into commercial successes, we don't necessarily talk about the type of exploitation that is actually being expected here. And so the problem is that if this is the behavior and if these are the conditions that the straight white male who does not threaten any advertisers, if this is the conditions that they face, what does that look like when it's not someone who looks like Tim? What does it look like if they're non-binary, or if they're black, or if they're a woman? And so it quickly, when you do a comparative case study, you quickly see how this falls apart. And so it worked out very well for Tim. He's one of the very few creators who has some job security. So after this event, he was able to leverage that into a multi-million-dollar contract with YouTube Gaming. And then now he's actually part owner of the Dallas Cowboys esports team, Complexity something. But like, that's a picture with him with Jerry Jones. So you go from being some random guy in Florida streaming out of your bedroom, and 10 years later, you're like doing business deals with Jerry Jones. So the trajectory for success is definitely there. But as we can see, it's not offered to everyone. It's not available to everyone. And so the second case study is a little bit different, and it's more about when those opportunities are denied. And so to start, on Twitch, emotes are very popular. They're basically emojis. They are one of the defining characteristics of the platform. As a streamer, when your fans subscribe to your channel, you get to use custom emotes, so they're an important part of the economy on Twitch as well. But one of the things that happened is that this very popular emote, it's called PogChamp, there was a person attached to this, so it was a real face. His name was Ryan Gutierrez, and so on January 6th, when there was the insurrection that was happening in the Capitol, Gutierrez started tweeting pro-insurrection and pro-QAnon nonsense. And so Twitch very quickly, so that happened, I think, about noon to 1 o'clock on January 6th, and within 3 hours, Twitch had banned him, publicly condemned him, removed the emote completely from their platform. And so it shows how quickly, so just from the beginning, when there is something that affects their perceived brand friendliness, the company moves extremely quickly to remove that threat and to neutralize it. It took less than 6 hours to get that entire corporate organization to make this decision. And I think that's pretty rare compared to other organizations. And so the community was devastated because they want their favorite emote. And so they suggested a solution in which everyone can be the face of this new PogChamp emote. And that would be a great way to promote diversity and inclusion and to make more equitable conditions for other people. And so Twitch did not do that. Instead, they decided to make one person the face of the emote for 24 hours. Now, this is 6 p.m. January 6th when they announced that they were removing it. January 8th, 9 o'clock. So they had less than a day to develop this solution program. Just for context, before we start talking about this even further. So this is something that the people, employees at Twitch, it is very likely that they had this was the first good idea that they had, and they ran with it to try to make it work, rather than taking time to think about what this is going to do to their streamers. And so one of the features on Twitch that kind of promotes this complementary labor is called raiding. And so it works well with the live 24/7 nature of Twitch. So if I am a streamer, and if I'm tired, if I've been streaming for 10 hours and I want to go to bed, I can use the raid feature, and all of my audience are now directed to someone else's stream. So I could send them to Amanda, or I could send them to Chris, and so that it helps try to grow everyone all together. So there is a culture of raiding on Twitch, but one of the problematic uses of that is hate raids. And so hate raids are famously when people use other websites like 4chan, 8chan, or Reddit to try to organize, and they use automated software to make fake accounts, and basically they flood the streamer's chat room with vitriol, racism, misogyny, terrible. The idea is to flood out any positive interaction that the streamer is having with their own community, and to try to make them essentially leave the platform. And so we are going to see, or I did see, how Twitch's relationship is determined by the streamer's perceived brand friendliness. And so as the campaign began, they quickly noticed that females, members of the LGBTQ, and BIPOC communities were all viciously targeted and harassed. I think on the third day, this guy, Critical Bard, he is a well-known person in the gaming and Dungeons and Dragons community. He has some public following on his own, right? He's not quite an influencer like a ninja, but he has his own niche following and communities, and so he's able to get the attention of journalists after his mistreatment. So when he is targeted and they are calling him the N-word, all these slurs, everything, it's the internet, it's anonymous hate speech, so it's as bad as you think it is. That is well recorded and publicized through journalists. And so that issues this response from Twitch, basically saying that it's home to creators and fans of all backgrounds, which we're excited to highlight through our daily Bog Champs. We believe in celebrating the diversity of our communities because we want Twitch to be a welcoming place for everyone to connect and create together. Hateful conduct and harassment stand in the way of that ideal, and they have no place on Twitch, social media, or anywhere else. We'll continue to take action against those who violate our community guidelines and seek to harm our community and creators. And so one thing that is notably missing from that is an actual apology, because once again, this is 1:45 January 12th. This is 6:57 January 12th. So on the day that this person, so you're supposed to have your day to celebrate your career, you've worked so hard, and now Twitch is sanctioning you as, a bona fide Twitch streamer, and your accomplishment and your reward now is that you get to be an emote that everyone can use. And so instead of being able to celebrate that and to leverage that with, commercial opportunities, making new sponsorships, or to, attract new people to your channel, you are instead met with hatred and vitriol, and you have to actually, as a streamer, take steps to limit your visibility. And so many of these streamers had to develop their own strategies to defend themselves and to defend their community members that are directly contradictory to the visibility logics that streamers like Tim the Tatman are expected to do. Because as an influencer, right, your entire job is to complement the platform by bringing in more ad revenue, and you do that by bringing in new attention or new sponsorships. But as we can see through Twitch and their statements right here, rather than make a commitment or a public stand with their content creators, they just make vague statements about, how that hate has no place on their platform without actually making any direct actions. So Twitch actually took steps to limit the visibility of this event. So they stopped tagging people eventually. They stopped promoting the event in any way. They stopped talking about it. And after 30 days, they just canceled it quietly and used a animated Komodo dragon as a replacement. So they learned their lesson and decided we can't have people as the emote anymore. And so they switched it. So this kind of shows you that not everyone has an opportunity. So you cannot just do complementary labor, essentially. So some of the generalizable findings and final takeaways. This challenges the idea. So Twitch markets itself like many of these other neoliberal platforms that anyone can achieve stardom, right? There's a theoretical meritocracy where if you put in the work and if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and if you spend enough time streaming, then you will become a famous person. But as we're seeing from this evidence and these two case studies, that is not the case. So in the first case study, we see kind of what that frictionless complementary labor looks like and how it's still exploitative. And in the second case study, we see how harassment threatens perceived brand friendliness and how that will dictate Twitch's behavior towards a streamer. And so ultimately why this matters, right, is because platformization is continuing to bring new forms of cultural production onto Twitch. So these dynamics are likely going to be replicated into other places and other types of cultural production. And that is all that I have right now. And so we can wait for, let's hear some questions.
Excellent. So thanks, Brandon. At this point, we'll turn it over to the committee for questions. And Dr. Han, I think you know that we have this tradition in the SOJC where we start with the outside member, cruelly so. So I thought I'd start with you, and then maybe we can move to Dr. Morrison and then Dr. Cody. My role will primarily be to take notes since Brandon and I have been going back and forth on this for some time. But Erin, let's start with you.
Thanks. Okay, so I guess I have a couple of questions. I guess the main thing though that I wanted to ask is first, maybe if you could talk a little bit more about this idea of complementary labor and where it's coming from for you and how you've kind of conceived it and pulled it together and why it's kind of a central piece here.
Absolutely. And yeah, I wish that we had the time to get into the full theoretical lit review. But essentially, this is a concept that comes out of software and technology studies in platform theory. And so the idea is that because Facebook operates as software, right, it has tools like software developer kits and APIs, the application program interface. I think that's how so there are these tools that third parties will use to extend the functionality of the original website. And so they started calling these people complementers because you're basically complementing the Facebook's growth. So one of the most famous examples is Zynga, the game developer company that made Farmville for Facebook. And so the idea is that so as an entrepreneur, you have these tools, and if you can be the first one on Facebook, you have the most to gain, and so you can have new types of, so you have these incentives to do this labor, right? Higher risk, high rewards. So I am kind of borrowing that concept and applying that to the streamers themselves to kind of see how they function at a more macro level in this marketplace. So it's not necessarily it's not quite a direct skill set like in media production where editing is a specific behavior. It's more of a general, the effect of your labor is complementing this by attracting new users and viewers, and making them watch more ads.
Okay, so thank you for that. I think then I would really strongly suggest that you tease some of that out more. I mean, I know you're talking about complementary labor throughout, but reading the dissertation, it was kind of unclear to me exactly how that, like, whether this was something that you were introducing as your theoretical paradigm or how you're kind of pulling it from elsewhere and applying it. And so, I mean, even if that's in there to a degree, I think I would really strongly suggest that you claim that a bit more and make that a little more front and center, given that it's in the title and it's like such an important sort of piece.
Absolutely.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask about was about the Fall Guy stuff and the meltdowns, because I think I'm noticing a little bit of a tension there, well, in a few places. So first of all, this idea of, like, you actually explained it really clearly in your presentation, and that was really helpful. But the idea of like what exactly you meant by the frictionless entry is another thing that could kind of get punched up a little bit more, foregrounded, like a little bit more, in the sense of like you're talking about him being kind of trolled by a bunch of people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like someone's giving him a hard time, but I get the distinction, and I like the distinction that it's like, well, that's very different than being like, you know, harassed with hate speech, which in the case of the other case. So I think, like, you know, just like think about maybe how to kind of foreground that or tease that out a little bit more, in the sense of like, yes, I see now what you mean by frictionless entry being kind of based on just that he has sort of, you know, privilege, basically, in the sense of that he's not, his identity isn't marginalized within that sort of platform. But then the other piece of that I was wondering about, though, is that I couldn't quite tell in your discussion, is whether we're supposed to kind of assume that this whole ongoing kind of harassment or whatever, like trolling of him, is a joke that he is participating in and that he is kind of like performing, or is that like an authentic is it authentic when he's having like a meltdown? So I guess my question is like, do you know, and does that distinction sort of matter?
Okay, so yes, yes, it does matter. So one of the methods that I used was critical discourse analysis, primarily of tweets, because to do that, I think that over 9 broadcasts, there's about 40 hours of streamed footage of him doing this, and so it's about 40 hours of him playing. So I did not watch all 40 hours of that. Rather, I relied on the public-facing and available data that was just on Twitter. So that being said, so what I wrote about in the actual case study, there's that methodological reason for the data that I'm using. But to your question of authenticity, I do believe that some of these moments are authentic. I think that, as a veteran content creator with over 10 years under his belt, I believe that he understands how to heighten up his dramatic performances for commercial appeal and audience appeal. But at the same time, I think that one of the nice things about live streaming and specifically gameplay is that it's really hard, like, you see that visceral moment. And so if you're doing this for 10 hours a day, it's really going to be harder for you to fake that performance as consistently as if you were doing something like Instagram, where it's shorter videos or static posts. And so when he's having these meltdown moments, I do think that he is authentically agitated and frustrated because, as you said, he's getting grief from everybody. He's playing games with the most popular influencers on Twitch. Those are his peers who he's playing with, and they're the ones who he's directly talking to on his headset, and they're making fun of him. And then when he looks to his own chat, they're making fun of him. And then if he leaves to his Discord or his Twitter, there's more people making fun of him. So I do think that there is that authenticity there. I think that it is impossible to verify without actually interviewing, and even then, how do you really, I mean, like, it's like interviewing an actor, right? This person is paid to do impression management, so that would be difficult. But to your point about, how much do we care about this? I think that we need to care a lot, because the idea, and, Ninja tends to be the person who is the most publicly viewed, like, streamer and acknowledged streamer, right? And so he has his own problems because he specifically markets himself as a child-friendly person, and so that kind of dictates how brands interact with him as well. Tim does not try to be. Tim is like the rated R version. If Ninja is PG, Tim is rated R, so he's allowed to swear. He's allowed to kind of talk about fighting and drinking on camera, and so that relationship that exists with brands and what they're comfortable with, and the types of behavior that they're there, because he throws his controller, he says he's going to fight people, so like that could be bad, right? Like male violence, misogyny, all that would be, those are things that could very well threaten a brand's willingness to be in that space. So by seeing how this works and how they tolerate this behavior with this person and this group, I think it makes it a little bit easier moving forward to seeing how it makes brands uncomfortable in other spaces, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to get at with frictionless, where not necessarily, because you're right, dealing with harassment is not frictionless entry into the marketplace, but the brand's willingness to tolerate this risk and these performances, that's where the frictionless entry comes in.
Yeah, I'd love to see that kind of teased out a bit more, like, as you're progressing with this work, just in like the really, kind of concise sense of saying that, that like, I've lost my train of thought of the concise thing I was going to say. That in the one case study, the harassment actually leads to benefits, which again, you're saying this, it's just like, it would be nice to like, just get a really quick kind of clear statement of this somewhere that's very signposty and flagged, rather than kind of buried in the analysis that like,
Okay.
He's getting this, they're both, there's harassment seems to be like a thread across your case studies, but yet they're very different kinds of harassment. So it's a nice opportunity to do what you're doing, but just even foreground it a bit more to say, well, this is really important to notice that this guy's getting harassed and he's getting a bump in his career, and that these other gamers are actually not only being harassed, they're also having a detrimental effect. Like, it's just very, I know it's like very basic, but just like put that right up there, so that it's really like really front and center. My last question was just about, I think as I was reading it, your case studies are so fascinating, and the analysis, and that feedback about putting things kind of front and center. I think there's also some other places where you say some really great stuff. In the second case study, like on page 110 and 111, there's a few kind of great lines about Twitch's kind of how Twitch is being silent, and like that's creating some of these problems. Get that more front and center, in the piece, instead of being kind of buried in the analysis and the discussion. But the last thing though I wanted to ask you about though was, I wanted more. I wanted more case studies, and I wondered if, like, one of the things that jumped out at me, and you do mention it at a certain point, is that, and it just came up just now when we were talking, is Twitter. And I know this is a dissertation about Twitch, but like, you're very clearly using a lot of data from Twitter for your analysis. So like, what is the kind of relationship or the interaction there between these two different platforms, these different kind, like they're different, if you're talking about the platformization,
POCP,
culture, then you're also like looking at this whole other platform there that's like giving you data, but that you're not looking at as much as a platform. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah. So and that's really, that is a very astute point, right? Because Twitch very rarely stays on Twitch, and I think that just that is an intentional feature, right? Because in their core UI or user interface, right, like you're supposed to be broadcasting yourself doing something else off of Twitch. So Twitch is always going to want to lend itself to other places on the internet, and so I think that at the software and infrastructure level, you kind of have that impetus, right, and that relationship, and it shares and features, and it uses like all the same shareability features that make all these other platforms kind of work with each other. But kind of culturally, these people are broadcasting 10 to 12 hours a day, and so they need stuff to talk about. I love video games, and I could probably do about 5 hours a day, and then I'd get bored. And so that's kind of where Twitter comes in, right? And so when you are Twitch streaming, you are focusing on your chat and your community and maybe the people that you are listening to in your headphones. And so that's a very isolating experience in a way. And so in order to kind of exit that little bubble that you've created, your own little Twitch bubble, that's kind of what Twitter is for, because it kind of flattens everybody else. It cuts through some of the noise, and it allows you, and honestly, when you are there's materially less demand to use Twitter than on Twitch, because Twitch has higher broadband. So if you're video streaming, it is more taxing on your internet connection to try to open up someone else's broadcast, right? So there's a bunch of reasons why you kind of use something that is less demanding of bandwidth, less resource intensive, and more efficient at communicating outside of basically Twitter is like the public square, because on Twitch, if I have 30,000 people watching me, and if they're all in the chat room, you can't really follow that conversation very well. I mean, you can kind of, it's almost like, I've heard people kind of describe it as the European football cheers. So you can't really make out what any one person is saying, but you know that this is that club's cheer, so you kind of know what they're saying. So there's a million different ways for them to communicate, all in once. I have done research that has been published using Twitch as data a couple times, and it is there's significant trade-offs. And so for this one, for my dissertation, I really wanted that comparison point of being able to say, here's what it looks like for the person who's supposed to face no additional barriers, and here's something to compare that to. And then in the PogChamp data set, there was over 35 streamers, and so there's 35 things to analyze. So to analyze all of those live streams, that would have taken a lot more resources and time than I had, especially since I got the job and had to finish. So this version is this is the version that needed to be done and completed by July. And so there were plans for many other case studies. I'm really interested in kind of looking at what sex work looks like on Twitch and how that kind of works with OnlyFans, because I think that's kind of where you see how it kind of falls apart a little bit more. But just through the constraints of having to finish, this is kind of how we had to chop things up.
Thanks. Yeah, it seems like in the future, it might be something to think about. You're talking about complementary labor, but you also seem to have these kind of complementary platforms too happening in terms of those relationships, like the OnlyFans thing too. So yeah. Well, that's it for my questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Deb, do you have any questions? Excellent.
Hi. In reading the dissertation and then in listening to you, sort of what Aaron talked about, I understood more about complementary labor and about this whole idea of the creative economy. So I think two things. One, I also wrote down Twitter and Twitch. I don't know if I was going to have the great question you did, but there's something there. And there's also something around frictionless. And it feels to me like frictionless entry is sort of redefined for everybody who comes in, right? His frictionless is different than mine or yours, right? So that may be a nice, happy section of defining and understanding more about that, and then defining the complementary mojo of Twitter and Twitch, because that's, I think, essential to really understanding this sort of weird and wonderful case study. The other thing, I kept coming back to the word you used, precarity. And it feels like this is precarity central, right? There are all sorts of strange and wonderful things happening. And it may be that you give us precarity factors within this, right? Maybe in the discussion that becomes a place for both your expertise and these other pieces that come there, because in the presentation you told us. So I would love to get a couple of paragraphs and understand that more, and I think it would give resonance to the whole piece. So finally, you know me, I want to get to this idea of usefulness. Useful as a piece of scholarship. There are all sorts of applications for this, but you're a consultant, and I want you to tell us the single most compelling idea that you take away from this, and how you would translate your sort of this rich study you did, translate that for an audience of your choice. It could be the Twitchers themselves, it could be the industry leadership, whatever you choose.
Oh, I love this question. So I would focus on kind of the key terms. And so I would basically coin it as frictionless entry versus perceived brand friendliness. And so I have pitched a version of this scholarship already to Twitch. And so it actually basically just saying, hey, I can use this example to generate actionable solutions on how to improve your user safety and harassment features. That abstract got me a $5,000 grant. No questions asked. They haven't asked to see anything that I've written. And so there's going to be follow-up there now that it is written. And so that is one of the things that I kind of grappled with in my work, right, is because we're doing this thing, we're understanding how everyone is moving so quickly. And that's why I want to try to point out like the time stamps and everything, because these decisions are happening so quickly. And as you can tell, academic scholarship does not move quickly. So like, what do we do? Because we spent years thinking about these relationships and cultivating expertise on this. And so I think that my goal is to point out structural flaws with the organization, because you don't know the people. But if I was to say this is this, and in the analysis, right, there was a couple people who managed that PogChamp promotion. So I could have named them like, this is your failure, but I don't think that would be conducive to making industry folks work with academic folks, because we don't necessarily know, like, I mean, if you are the leader, yes, it is ultimately your failure, but phrasing it in that language isn't necessarily going to make you want to listen to me. And I've spent a lot of time trying to make it so that people want to listen to me. And so kind of balancing what those tensions are together, like how do we make this a productive space for everybody? And so I think that focusing on events where the dust has settled kind of lends itself better to that. I don't think that going to them saying, hey, here's what happened this week and here's how you screwed up is going to necessarily help with that conversation or that goal. But I think that there might be some advantage to saying, okay, a year has passed. Maybe someone has moved on. Maybe like something has changed, right? And so that bit of time lends for some objectivity about it. So that's kind of something that I am thinking of. But, there's always the monograph that we can write with more case studies. There's always, op-eds, white papers. I have done some consulting before where they were much more conducive to that when someone already got the contract and I was brought in to help make that contract better. That worked pretty well. And so I think it just kind of, I mean, it just depends on what are the precarity factors that are in place for me as well as for the people that we're researching, I think. And that kind of determines what the ask is going to be, what the product is going to look like.
And you might really shape that idea of precarity factors. The PF of this, work on that, right?
There's so many people doing cool stuff on this, and then it changes based off of the country that you're in. And there's a lot of really good stuff there, so I couldn't take ownership for that. But one of the biggest challenges of this work is that I am a critical media industry scholar. I am not an identity feminist or racial scholar. And so I talked to Chris and Amanda frequently about being uncomfortable with this because I don't know the literature well enough to really make expert claims. And like, that's not my experience, right? Like I am me. So I don't want to how do I find a way to make this a productive conversation that isn't just, me speaking out of pocket. And so that is, I think that's kind
your
of
own precarity factor. Yes, right. Yeah.
Yes, and so I think that's kind of where some of the focus on harassment emerged from, right? Because like, oh, okay, we know what harassment is, and so I think that's kind of one of the things that filtered into this project on its own.
Yeah. Well, very interesting. And I would, to Aaron's point, I would look at that relationship, that rich relationship of Twitter and Twitch. There's something there that could be mined. Anyway, thank you. I learned.
Thank you.
Amanda, any questions from you?
Well, Brandon's heard lots of my questions all along through this process, but I guess I will keep it brief and have one statement and one question. First, critical work is by definition feminist, anti-racist, etc., or it should be, because it's concerned with power structures. So I wouldn't dismiss your contributions there just because it's not your specific area of expertise. The question is, knowing you just came back from a conference on platforms and critical media industries and all of that, seeing the dissertation and then knowing that you have the intention to make it a book, what in an ideal world do you want your contribution to the field to be from this project? What about this project do you want people to recognize you for moving forward?
Oh, that's so simple. I think that we'll just keep it with the key terms with using that kind of concept of perceived brand friendliness, and using not necessarily to suggest that they're polemic, but perceived brand friendliness versus like harassment, and how that kind of factors into the precarity of the individual. I think that, and in those circles where everyone is talking about this industry, different types of precarity, different, types of influencers, there was actually very little work being done on the people who would be in that core gaming, who were historically part of that core gaming argument. And so I think that, oh God, this sounds so weird, because we don't need more scholarship on straight white dudes. But I think that framing it as this is not necessarily about straight white dudes for the sake of talking about straight white dudes, but this is how they are treated in the workplace, and these behaviors are very different when you compare them to someone else. I think that's where I would like the value or my takeaways to be, because in some instances, they're quite boring, right? Like you're going along with self-deprecating jokes. There's not a whole lot there for, theoretical richness, right? And as we saw with, the marginalized streamers, they had to come up with their own solutions or their own strategies to promote themselves. And so I think that's kind of more interesting. But especially in a rapidly evolving marketplace like this, I think that we still need to understand the specific behaviors and mechanisms that propel these people to the top. And like as we saw with Tim, right, he's failing upwards. So critically interrogating what allows him to do that is important.
Excellent, thank you. I realized that was an unfairly broad question, so I will use that as my only one for now.
Excellent. I just have a few questions and then we can open up to the gallery. And so for the first one, like I know we've been talking about this, your discomfort of wandering into some of this territory, but I think you have, and in some ways the chapters explicitly go in that direction. And I think especially the way you frame case one and case two, I mean, the way that it's framed is that it's really his whiteness and his whaleness that really gets him to this position of power. But I have a feeling there's much more there that you could probably make explicit, right? So there are dozens, if not hundreds, of straight white dudes that are trying to get to that position, but not all of them end up shaking hands with Jerry Jones. He does. And so there's an ideal streamer for this particular platform. And I think that's something that you could probably tease out is given this particular platform, who is the ideal streamer? And it could be, you know, race, gender, could be the demographics, but it's also sort of the smaller things, right? How you present yourself, how you speak, how you game, how you photograph. There are so many more different things that can then allow you to have more nuanced discussions around race and gender, right? Rather than just merely identity factors in and of themselves. So I think those things could be teased out a bit more just by knowing, again, if you think about Twitch as a platform that is governed by a particular logic and sets of rituals, who is the ideal streamer for that, and then explicitly laying that out. And then that could be, again, of useful you know, service if you do go into consulting, that would be something that would be much more informative. The other thing too, and this is kind of building on the argument that Aaron was making, is that we, in some ways, we have limited language to talk about a range of things that are happening, right? So we use trolling to talk about anything from kidding to something a little bit stronger, to things that are overtly racist and misogynistic, and probably even worse, right? And so there's a whole spectrum of discourses and activities that are happening in there. And it may make sense to try to codify that or provide some sort of typology of all of those different kinds of reactions that are happening within this construct that we call trolling, because it seems that it encompasses a large amount of kinds of responses that people are getting. Some of them are benign, some of them are neutral, some of them are damaging. And so that's, again, some ways that you could contribute to this literature is to dig deeper and provide some sort of typology to the kinds of discourses that are out there. And then I guess my last one, in the kind of the spirit of these like bigger questions of contribution to the field, is that, so you've spent the past several years studying Twitch specifically. And in listening to some of the results, like it could be Reddit, it could be Twitter. I mean, none of this necessarily is surprising, but is there something specific about Twitch and the way that this specific platform is structured that generates this kind of activity? Like, what is it about Twitch specifically?
Yeah, and I think that is one of the most interesting things about Twitch is like it is the interactivity, and so that is actually, and I've talked about this before, and how hard it is to capture what makes Twitch so unique in like a static paper or something. Like you really do kind of need that video to see like, oh, this is the interact, and this is like the cadence and the rhythm behind all these interactions. But I think that what makes Twitch unique as a live streaming platform right now is that, at least in North America and Western Europe, because it's very different in China and Asia, but they have the best user interface for chatting. And so the ability to type in the chat room and to speak to the person on camera is the best of all the competitors. Facebook and YouTube have competing services, and they're trying to enter into that space. But both of them started as something that was not a live streaming service. I, like, as a consultant, I've worked on YouTube, right, and like trying to make them more competitive in this space. But the fact of the matter is, YouTube was set up as a video on demand archive system, and to make it better at live streaming is going to come at the cost of their video service. And so that's kind of where I'm trying to talk about how they dominate modalities a bit. platforms. And so for Twitch, they kind of have that set up the best. Originally, their monetization offerings were more generous to streamers, and so that was a huge reason to get early adapters on. And they're also aggressively pursuing other types of content. So they're going after the NFL commercials. They are at the beginning of the pandemic, when all the music was canceled, they worked with Bandcamp and other band platforms to basically, if you could verify that you were eligible for music tours or that you were a professional musician, they streamlined your ability to monetize your content on Twitch. And so they are almost doing, in my opinion, this company is doing better at seeing how they need to diversify their type of content than most of the other platforms are at this moment. And so I think that positions them a little bit more strategically going forward. And so I think that kind of talking about these creators, it's just always going to require like that specific context of like when and how, like what is the case that we're talking about, like what is the policies that make this happen, because it can change so quickly. And so I think that, did I get to all of your question?
No, this is all pretty helpful. Yeah, and it's first just a lot of questions for me. And so again, that might be something to tease out, especially in that concluding chapter is what is it that's unique about this particular platform? And I suspect part of it too is its conflation with gaming. So it's not like YouTube in that it's really closely associated, and I'm sure it inherits some of the same maladies that we get along with the gaming sector in general. So but something to tease out. But with that, I guess we could open up to questions from the gallery.
But real quick before we do that, so to your typology of harassment and trolling, I actually did talk to Whitney Phillips about that. And so that is on our checklist of, like, okay, that's this term is no longer useful, especially when, like I control Amanda with, oh, you're so jet lagged. And that's very different than, like me being anonymous and trolling someone and saying, like, go kill yourself, stop streaming, like you're never going to make it. Right. So, and I think that type of work is being done out of like with Alice Marwick and her crop of grad students at University of North Carolina. So that work is definitely being done, but it is very interesting, especially as Twitch becomes more and more of a like political communication hub. And so Maxwell and I have we've got a couple articles in revision right now, or under review, excuse me, on, like political discourse and journalism. And so like, what does that look like? And so as we've seen from 2016 and 2020 elections, right, like Facebook is very important to our election democracies now. And so I think that in the future, Twitch is going to be a bigger part of that. It's already been used by Democrats and progressives like AOC, and so they've used that to register, to do voting drives. And so I think that right now we're just seeing like the first generation basically of Twitch streaming. And so that early market was that gaming community. And so they understood what the space was, what it offered, and it was relatively easy to kind of fit that ad revenue model onto that space. And so now as we're growing out and extending, like you said, some of these policies that worked well for the gaming community are not going to hold up as well when, you're trying to regulate a political debate. Like, what does that look like when you're hosting a governor's debate and, the chat is spewing whatever chat's going to say. So I think that's kind of where my interests lie kind of moving forward here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's also an interesting insight that, because it seems like people see this platform as a public good, when in reality, and I think you make this point really clearly, that it's a private good, right? It's a corporation. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. But let's open it up to questions from the gallery, if there are any. If you could use your icon and let me know.
Max.
Hello.
Max.
Hello.
Hello.
Great presentation. And I hope that my slight statement and question were not answered at the very beginning of it. Sorry, I'm chasing Deb around Zoom meetings all day. So that is what I will be doing after this as well. So not having read the dissertation, my question, especially observing the fact that all of the readers sort of brought up this wider ecosystem that exists around Twitch. They mentioned Twitter. I would throw YouTube heavily into that mix as well. I'm just wondering if you could comment a little bit. We are at a school that teaches media and communications. If all things work out, you'll be in a similar boat pretty soon. What are the lessons about media that media professionals can take more broadly from Twitch as a platform? And I'm thinking about either using Twitch or using the wider ecosystem that surrounds Twitch. What are the things that we as faculty should be taking away and teaching our students regarding Twitch or Twitch-like platforms?
Kindness. Just be kind. That's a real person. I think that Twitch is effective. I actually, a colleague of mine had never been to Twitch, and so he was crashing at my apartment, and this was years ago, and so he'd never been before, and coming out of the bars, he'd never seen this, and so his immediate reaction was, oh, let's say, some dumb stuff, because he was coming at it like it was like an AOL chat room from back in the day where it was all anonymous. And so I was like, no, this is my real name. It's linked to my Amazon account. And like, no, you don't talk to people like that way. So like, that's not a funny joke. And so I always remember that because he didn't really mean anything. And if you were to ask him, like, would you ever be misogynistic to somebody like just out and about? No, he would not. And so I think that there's something there that we still haven't quite come to terms with, right? Like that even though someone is on a screen and a keyboard away from you, you still need to be kind to them. And so I think that the webcam helps with that. I think that Zoom meetings have, for 3 years, kind of have helped with that, to normalize that a little bit. But I think that my biggest takeaway is like, just be kind to people, because I think that's how a lot of these streamers grow. Aspiring streamers are kind to other aspiring streamers, and then they kind of want to continue growing together. So like, unless you are an actual like professional esports person who is just some aim god who people will follow you no matter what, like you're essentially a Kobe Bryant type of athlete, you need to be kind to people. Like people need to want to interact with you. And so that's kind of what I would take away from that, outside of like the media production skills, because those are all things that we can put onto our rubrics. Those are all teachable skills. But I think that the most like taken for granted one is be nice to people online. And I wish it sounded more like sophisticated than that, but no, that's the takeaway after years.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions from the gallery? Going once, twice. Okay, so then at this point, Brandon, I think since you have control, would you be able to put your committee into a breakout room? And
Yes.
then we'll deliberate, and then I'll text you when we're ready to render the decision, and which, I'm guessing is about 5 or 10 minutes.
Co-host, yes, I will do that. And so you are a co-host now, and then I need to make a breakout room. Or where's the breakout room again? Chat.
So it should be at the bottom. There's like something
More.
called
There we go. Breakout rooms. Assign manually. Create. Assign. Cody. Amy.
Excellent. Thank you.
There we go.
So I'll text you once we're ready to leave.
Cool.
Thank you.
I'm gonna use the restroom real quick.
Good job, Brandon.
Oh, thank you.
That was really interesting.
Thank you, thank you. Glad to see you here, and thank you so much for all of your help over the years. My goodness.
Yeah, it'll be nice. You have to keep in touch as an alum. Send me your
Absolutely.
new email address and I'll add it to the listserv if you haven't already.
Yeah.
And while I have you all here, I hope to see all you Eugene people at Leslie's reception tomorrow from 4 to 7. If it rains, there will be tents.
Okay. I do not think that I'm going to be there because I'm still getting over my COVID exposure that I got at the airport. I
Oh,
tested on
sorry to hear
Monday,
that.
and so I think that would be a little too soon.
A little dicey.
Yeah.
We'll
But
have
otherwise,
we'll toast to your successful defense. I'm not worried about the committee's decision.
oh, thank you. And then Mrs. Stocks, he is my dissertation cat. He helped write most of the chapters, and so he gets a shout out too. The other cats helped, but they were not as interested.
I still owe you the list of my friends' cats' names that are long and complicated.
The seven names.
Yeah, I have them somewhere, but I owe them to you.
It's important information.
I know you've been waiting for solid 2 weeks about it.
On pins and yeah, the entire time that we were in Europe at conferences, that's what I was thinking.
Just what
of.
we were thinking about the entire time. Yep.
Patrick, is your semester over? Or are you still in tutoring hell?
Yeah, I'm still tutoring, but that ends next week, and summer school's already started at Stony Brook. But yeah, congratulations, great job, man.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Patrick, I'll be out on the island in about a month.
Oh, nice, great,
Going to a wedding.
nice. That sounds fun.
Yeah, it should be nice.
Are you performing at this one as a musician, or are you just attending?
The wedding I was supposed to perform in, they never followed up on, which was sort of a bummer. But that was also supposed to be on Long Island. There were many connections between Long Island and SUNY New Paltz, which was where my band had its 5 minutes of fame. But no, I will just be attending. My wife will be a bridesmaid, so I really won't be doing anything but sitting somewhere in the back.
Yeah.
Here we go. One of the new cat's names is Knight Commander Maribel of Trashtopia.
I just heard Hope in the other room go, whoa.
Let's see if I can find the other ones. Oh, yeah. Dame Fluffy Face McBuddington III, Slayer of Dragons, Flayer of Peasants, and Dropper of the Beat.
So did they remember that every
Yes.
time? Oh, man.
That's the long one. The shorter one is Baron Buddy von Freeloader III.
Baron von Freeloader. I like that. That would be a good band name.
This is from the drummer of my band, so, this was what our relationship is.
Hey, Brandon.
Hey, yo.
It was a delight to watch the presentation. Good job, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You'll be here soon. And it's going to be super interesting. I have people for you to meet under. And I will, yeah.
From the ICA, yeah.
Yes. And, oh, God, where's my phone? I'll send her Twitter info to you. But she was doing Twitch streamers and YouTubers from Turkey and the material constraints on that. And I was like, that sounds like someone I know.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. Interesting that I don't know of her. Where is she at?
Hold on.
Anyway, okay, later.
Send to...
You could stop all the side chatter now. So first of all, we'd like to congratulate you, Dr. Brandon Harris. The committee felt that it was great work, that you really have a strong command of the material, that it has poised to make a contribution to the field. I have taken notes. There are some areas that we would like addressed. Some of them are issues that came up during the conversation, conceptualizing some of the terms and operationalizing them, talking about this larger ecosystem of not only Twitch, but Twitch's relationship to other media properties and platforms that are part of these discourses. And then in that concluding chapter, really teasing out, things like, what do we understand about the platform? What do we understand about media studies? And so I'll go ahead and coalesce these into sort of an actionable report on addressing the feedback. But congratulations, this is a
Thank
really
you.
fantastic work.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And thanks everybody for joining us. Anything that you wanted to say, Brandon? I'm taking a picture, by the way.
Just pretty stoked to be tentatively done at the moment. I'm sure that more things will pop up as soon as I leave this call, but for now, just feels good.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody, and then celebrate tonight. So I hope you're doing something fun, and then we'll see you on Monday.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, take care, everybody.
Congrats, Brandon.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. 2 weeks. That's right. Dr. Harris. Hot dog.